Next, let's queer up gay culture. Daytime TV legend and LGBTQ plus ally Phil Donahue is remembered for AIDS kindness. Phil Donahue, who passed this week, was a pioneering talk show host whose influence on daytime television was profound. Donahue's willingness to address controversial and often ignored issues set his show apart, particularly in the 1970s and 1980s when mainstream media largely shunned LGBTQ topics. Donahue's The Phil Donahue Show provided a crucial platform for marginalized communities, especially during the AIDS crisis. It was a time when fear and misinformation were rampant. He invited queer individuals and AIDS patients to share their stories, humanizing their experience in a way that was both empathetic and groundbreaking. One of his most notable episodes, quote, AIDS Face to Face in 1986, showcased his compassion as he engaged with AIDS patients, challenging the stigma and fear surrounding the disease. Donahue's approach not only informed the public, but also provided solace to those who felt ostracized. In May, President Biden awarded Donahue the Presidential Medal of Freedom, honoring his groundbreaking efforts in raising awareness and fostering empathy for the LGBTQ plus community and the AIDS crisis. Donahue's work transcended television. He made a lasting impact on public perception and the lives of countless individuals. He was an unconditional ally to the LGBTQ plus community. We will miss him. I learned most about AIDS, HIV, the crisis, through Phil Donahue and through other talk show hosts. Yeah. I remember being a kid, before talk show hosts, they never really talked about molestation or any kind of sexual issues in the public, sphere. It was always something that was just a secret that was swept, until Oprah and Donahue and Maury and for the younger crowd, Ricky Lake, they were talking about all of these things, and we actually had these conversations. I remember hearing about AIDS when I was in high school, and I didn't know much about it except it was a gay disease. It was this gay cancer that was killing everybody, and nobody wanted to touch them. Nobody would go into a hospital room.
Except the lesbians.
Except for the lesbians, at that time. But like no public figures were, except for Princess Diana. And I remember when that was like a huge thing for me. She took off her glove and like touched a person with her bare hand before she even, we knew the full scope of transmission and all of that stuff. So, I remember listening to some of those patients, and it went from demonizing these people to like, oh my God, like what they are going through. I can't, like, is there a way that we can help them? Like their families, like this is a horrible thing, whether you agree with the lifestyle and the orientation of being gay, like churches, like, how could you not look at these people? They need help, And so, gosh, I'm even like tearing up remembering some of this. I remember Kimberly Lentz, who was the first AIDS patient that I remember, who was, I think that was her name. I hope I'm not getting it wrong. And watching her, and I think she was the first non-gay male. And the media actually gave her a lot of attention because, she didn't have the stigma. And watching her degrade was like, it was horrible. And people like Phil Donahue stood up, and it wasn't popular. It's not like you pitch to your producer, AIDS, gays, like that's where the money's at, So, they took a leap of faith on there, and they were willing to get called, all kinds of names and being called gay themselves and all of that stuff. Congratulations.
So beautiful,
Thank
Trini,
you.
that you all I love that. I think that many people probably for the first time even learned about our community or the transgender community on talk shows like this, So, he was definitely way before his time, and he didn't have to be. He was a white cisgendered man. He didn't have to, During the Stonewall riots, around that time, he had interviews with gay men. Nobody did that shit. Nobody, In an interview with Oprah, he said, I had to get into gay politics. I had to get into the activism part of it all. Gayness is not a moral issue, yet no institution on earth has promoted homophobia more than the church. He even went after the church. This is not something that people would just do on network television without the scare of maybe losing their contract or losing their show. He didn't give a crap. You know, I mean, from interracial marriage to all kinds of stuff. He really did touch on those subjects that others would not.
So,
you know?
and our little local connection, you all might know her, but Kelly Anderson, who used to live in Wilton. She's no longer in South Florida, I don't think. But she was on the Donahue Show, you know, as a trans activist and drag queen. So, you know, if you get a chance, you can watch it on YouTube. She had a great little appearance.
You know, Donahue, I watched him growing up. I mean, several generations, he taught several generations about humanity. I remember coming home from school and I wanted to watch the Phil Donahue Show. And I remember he was in Miami one time and he did a show at the Miami Marine Stadium and they were talking about what language should be spoken in Miami. It was a huge thing. There was a conversation about an official language of Miami. And he came down and he did this show with community members and it was kind of contentious, but he was, you know, he was the guy who made it easy to have hard conversations. And, you know, I learned a lot from him too.
Well, and imagine those conversations spilling into your living room, right? And like living with parents that are not supportive, like many of us had to, you know, grow up
and
in,
watching the show with them.
And watching it with them and it sparking some kind of conversation. Maybe it didn't go the way you went, but that conversation would have never happened in my house if it wasn't for something to spark up like this on TV. It just wouldn't.
Well, and knowing that you contributed to the zeitgeist is not just about like doing all the stuff that he did, but it's about what other people do with you. He was the butt of jokes all through the, you know, early and mid 90s, which means that he was having an effect. You know what I mean? He was making his way into our culture and saying, hey, we got to talk and think about this stuff. And that's why comedians as well as talk show hosts are important.
You know what also I just want to add, like he and people like Doug Emhoff, like the friends of yours that were straight, that didn't care that they had a gay friend, always had like such a huge impact on me. And he was one of those dudes, and like that don't care that somebody's gonna make fun of them. I'm like, what are you two doing? Like, you know, oh, for you to have a gay friend. Like, even my own mother like would question like, why would this friend, like when I mean, I was much older when she found out, like in my 30s, but then she would ask me about all my straight friends, like, why would they want to be friends with you? And I was like,
because I'm a good guy.
Exactly. You know, but it just like, it didn't really click to her because it was such a stigma, you know, and we're talking back in the 80s, you know, when this was not as nearly accepted as it is now, or even 10 years, 10, 15, 20 years ago, you know, that the guys that are willing to take the barbs for their gay friends, I'm like, you know, I love you, man. Thank you so much.
Rest in peace.
Sweet.